Hi everyone, Richard Lewis here again with a video about CSGO. Now while I was at Gfinity there was a few roster moves and whatnot, one of which of course stood out more than the others, which was Skytten, apologies for the pronunciation, from Team Kinguin. He was apparently allowed to leave the team, and it came after a bout of health problems where he had to go back to his native Sweden and receive some health care. Now, from the moment Team Kinguin were announced, they reminded me of my childhood for some reason.
One of these things is not like the others. One of these things doesn't belong. Can you tell which thing is not like the other by the time I finish this song?
Now, I'm of course referring to how out of place Skytten actually was. From the start of the team, he was the player who was always going to be under the most scrutiny. He is neither a big name nor a fan's favourite. He would need to hit levels of performance that were beyond him if he was to match any of the other talented people in the team. And where we typically see fan favourites will be forgiven for poor play if they put in a bad game or whatever, or world-class players like Scream, for example, can always hide behind the word potential because they've been the best before, they've played at a supreme level. Skytten ultimately had nowhere to hide. Now, that obviously put him under an immense amount of pressure, and you combine the fact that he was the in-game leader as well to boot of the team that is the highest paid team in Europe. This is now a fact that I think is well known by everybody. It's not a great environment for him, and when the health problems arose, I think he knew, I think he probably knew he wasn't going to get a chance to come back to the team. Certainly, if that wasn't the case, the writing was on the wall as soon as the team won the Gamers Paradise qualifier without him. His replacement, Nico, just destroyed Flipside, and it kind of underlined just how superfluous he was, how little even his leadership mattered within the context of competitive CSGO. Now, it's been a feature of his career in a lot of ways that he leaves the team and they improve. So after he left LGB, that was definitely the case. They became a much stronger team, a much stronger lineup. When he was in Team Orbit, again, they were kind of the Swedish players that were on the periphery of the other big teams. All of the players were far superior in just terms of raw skill to him. And some of those players were even considered for the NIP replacement spot back when they started trialing with guys like Makalela, who Skytten had obviously played with as well, and Arlu, of course, who remains in the team to this day. Now, when you weigh all this up, it's not that there isn't room for an in-game leader that doesn't frag or support players, that set up the kills for better players around them, because there absolutely is. In fact, I would go so far as to argue many successful teams have one of those elements. A great team leader that maybe doesn't pull his weight on the scoreboard, although that seems to be changing quite a bit. Or you have a support player who will consistently bottom frag, but it's what he does for everybody else. We all know statistics can be deceptive. But the reality is, if you don't win, all of that becomes a meaningless gesture. The success is ultimately all that justifies the baseline level of performance from those individuals. Now, that isn't to say I don't sympathise with what's happened to him, because all the players that came into Team Kinguin were taking a huge gamble. First of all, it's a massive unknown quantity, a new organisation coming into the CSGO scene, running a team for the first time. We have no idea about the management infrastructure or coaching that's in place. We have no idea about the earnestness of their intentions long term, whether this is a case that they just simply want to have a placeholder team because it acts as a bigger billboard than being a sponsor to another team. we also don't know how long they're going to be willing to put money into this endeavour if it proves fruitless. But Kinguin did offer a lifeline for a lot of these players. Many of them were on downward trajectories on their career. I would say Skytten being one of them. Others were taking a first step into the real spotlight. And when you're the highest paid team in Europe, everybody is right to expect. In fact, I was incredibly surprised at DreamHack Summer when on the days that they played in the group stages, Team Kinguin actually was the game that had the highest number of viewers. It was the peak viewers for that day. Clearly they have a huge fan base just predicated on the roster that they have. But obviously they were always going to be ruthless. Everybody knew this. Everybody speculated what would happen if they failed to deliver. And indeed, under Skytten's regime, they did fail to deliver. They didn't really have any notable results. In fact, quite the contrary. They had to go to DreamHack Summer and play in the qualifiers, the BYOCs, just to get into the groups. They had 2 attempts at qualifying before and failed on both occasions. And again, I want you to contextualize what that means for a team of that level of investment, that level of stature. So changes were always going to happen in the short term with Team Kinguin. They were desperate to get the team. This is why they paid well over the odds when they outbid SK Gaming for them. But the problem is that now players are going to know that actually people will be cut if they fail to live up to the standards. And that's going to be interesting to see how that dynamic affects the team moving forward. If you create an environment where people are wondering who's going to be next on the chopping block, where people are worried that a sustained period of poor form might see them removed from the team, you're in for a bad time. Again, just to use the NIP comparison, when they had Fiflaren, who was clearly the regular bottom fragger, the poorest statistical player in the team that seemed to be the lightning rod for all the criticism, I don't know if that team could have been as successful if there was ever a chance that the players would have mutinied and basically kicked him and replaced him. And you can argue they may have been better off had they done that, but equally, if we look at how it's gone for them since he was removed, it does underline that sometimes chemistry can be more important. And sure, the game's evolved a lot since then, but I think it's fair to say it's a factor. So, if Fiflaren had been in the position, or anyone in NIP had been in the position where they were really worried about, well, I've had 2 bad tournaments on the spin now, that's the end of me, I don't know if you can have a team that goes on to the sustained period of success. I also don't know if you can have a team like now, where they're going through this massive transitional phase with a huge fan base and a huge weight of expectations, big investors in the background. I don't know if they would have the mental strength to deal with that either. So what makes it interesting is when his replacement came in, when Skytten's replacement came in, Nico, he's obviously currently, I believe, a mouse sports sort of secondary player. Kinguin wanted to buy him, this is the rumour anyway, based on the performance that he put in at Gamers Paradise, where he, like say, he absolutely wrecked Flipside in the final, and that was a Flipside with Simple, who had one of his worst performances for quite some time. And apparently the German organisation just wouldn't name a reasonable price, or Kinguin didn't want to make the purchase. So we've now got the introduction of Dennis into the team, which actually, all things considered, is a very good pickup. And perhaps if people don't go back to 2013 in the scene, they might be a little bit underwhelmed. Although I think for the most part it's been well received by the fans. It's interesting actually because there's a little parallel, there's a bit of history repeating here. Because back when Dennis was in Team LGB as well, it was eventually Skytten that was pushed out. And if you read any of the articles or features around that team, there was a consistent feature, and that was they didn't really respect his in-game leadership or his ideas about the game because they felt they were better than him, and clearly are, and therefore they understood the game better than him. And if you think that when Dennis was in that LGB team, he was in a team with like Olofmeister, Crims, Twist, Sipe, I think was the other one, after Makalele and Whitten left. Dennis was actually up there in terms of fragging and just raw ability with the player that many now consider the best in the world. In fact, if you think about what that lineup could have achieved, if you look at what Fnatic have gone on to do, if that LGB roster had been able to stay together and receive the same level of support as Fnatic has, who knows where we would all be in the CSGO landscape. But like LGB before them, it now seems that they're moving into a period where they're not going to have a recognised in-game leader, and they're going to sort of do what LGB used to do, which was to sort of just play this loose style where they're almost playing by committee, where players are saying, hey, this is a good idea, we should do this. No, I'm going to go and do this. Okay, well, while you're doing that, I'll do this. And that can actually be a factor that frees up some of the other players to have better performances. We've seen this in a lot of teams. For example, I'll allude to Very Games when Shox was in the team. Existence as an in-game leader, he's very rigid. He has playbooks. He wants you to play a certain way. He tells you exactly what to do. And if you don't do that, then obviously you're in trouble. And this is why Shox couldn't exist in that lineup despite numerous attempts. He could never work with Existence as a leader because Shox is a player that needs to, he's got to play how he feels. He wants to express himself in the game. Sometimes he'll get an idea to do something that won't work or shouldn't work on paper, but he can make it work just because of his incredible skill levels. So if you look at Envious, there's an example of, yes, they have an in-game leader, but as we know from Happy, actually he doesn't put players in a box. He doesn't put them in a position. He lets them play. He lets them express themselves. Shox especially, who has played multiple different roles within the team. Of course, it can go the other way, and the lack of a real strong in-game leader could mean that players start to try and do too much, or they're not aware of the bigger picture. They don't communicate as effectively, and actually it can be a recipe for disaster with some teams. Now, we're going to have no idea which way it's going to go with Team Kinguin until we see them play again. But I think ultimately what we can agree on is that Whitten, unfortunately, was always going to be the first man out. That's just how it's been for his career. That's how it was when you looked at the roster in terms of strength. And the introduction of Dennis, I think, makes Kinguin actually a little bit more exciting. Definitely gives them a bit more firepower in terms of how they're going to compete. If they can keep structured, who knows? They could definitely be dark horses. I think the only problem you've got if you're a Team Kinguin player is if after one roster change it doesn't click immediately, it's probably only going to be a short time before there's another. So anyway, I just wanted to give some brief thoughts on that. No doubt I'll be talking about it again a little bit later. Me and Thorin will be doing By the Numbers tomorrow as of recording this video, so that's every Wednesday. We'll be addressing all the CSGO news in that. So until then, thanks a lot for listening. I'll see you on the next video.